Warning: this episode gets into some difficult material from the book, including abuse. Listener discretion advised.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Shelf Destruct podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you listen to the last episode, we are covering the part one of Playworld by Adam Ross, which is a 2025 novel. We're going to have a lot to talk about for part one. It's really good to see you guys. It's been crazy in all of our lives. I feel like we had a really good cadence there for a minute of recording episodes, but it seems like every time we try to record one, something goes wrong. Like, for instance, today, where we were supposed to start an hour ago, but I am now having to relocate in my own house because my Wi-Fi decided that it doesn't reach my basement anymore. So, anyway, what's been going on with you guys?
Yeah, dude, it's been super busy. And also definitely acknowledging the fact that you look like you're in some sort of like hostage situation video. So
Yeah, I feel like if I move this light, like I could do like the whole put a bag over my head and like yeah.
this is gonna be great for the thumbnail. Yeah. But no, it's been super busy. Totally feel you. We've been traveling a bunch recently, trying to sell our house. It's just been chaos. But I will say it's been nice to go back into a book. And I know this section was a little over 200 pages for this part one.
Hmm.
But it reads so easy. And so I was actually glad I could kind of take my time and go through it. And also it just being so different than what we've read recently. It was a
Hmm.
nice change of pace, but yeah, good to see you. Jensen, how you been?
I mean, honestly, actually, pretty great. I finished this section's reading like way before y'all. Um, I'm not moving. I haven't had any crazy work stuff that's kept me late, and I don't have any kids, so my life has been easy and smooth sailing lately.
Empty.
Uh, Meanwhile, me and Taylor have just essentially been trying to cut weight in real life, like
Yeah.
just
I've been trying to gain weight. I'm doing the opposite of poor Griffin in this section.
Yeah.
yeah.
But let's I can't wait any longer. I have been wanting to talk to y'all about this book. I started reading it, and generally, even with some of the greatest books I've ever read, I will like read like I'll have like kind of a goal of how many pages I want to read in a day. Um, and I will hit that number and be like, all right, this is a good place to stop, and I'll kind of ponder, and I'll come back and read the next part that I have planned for tomorrow. This book, I was sitting there reading, and I would get to the end of like a chapter of like, okay, this is where I plan to stop, and I'd be like, I'm gonna read one more. And that's not really ever happened. And if it has happened, it's very rare to like just not be able to put a book down. It is kind of Hemingway-esque in like kind of the simplicity of writing, so it doesn't
Hmm.
feel overly flowery, and it's modern and dramatic, and I feel like there's a lot happening, so like I kept feeling myself like, oh, I gotta find out what's gonna happen next. But what are
Yeah,
y'all's
no,
personal preference?
yeah, I found it. This is my second time reading it, so I read it last year or the year before. I can't remember when. But anyway, I found it the first time to be really propulsive and exactly what you're talking about. And the second time, even more so, because I kind of knew where stuff was going. But um, I kind of think upon like re examining, like reading it again, I just was able to pay more attention to his writing a little bit more specifically. And there was just like there's certain parts, certain descriptions, certain little metaphors, similes, and stuff that he used, where I was just like, "Oh my god, that is so good!" And there was like multiple times where I read something that like stuck with me that I wrote down, and I was like, "Man, that was a really good line." So you can tell that like you can just tell how much thought he put into each line, because at one point it is exactly like what you're saying. It's very propulsive and the plot moves and makes you want to move along with it, but it also just has really really good writing, which I feel like a lot of times with newer books I find that you almost get one or the other, you know. And this is kind of one of those rare ones where I want to keep reading, but I also want to slow down and like read all the individual lines and stuff like that, all these little observations and stuff. To your point, Jensen, yeah, a little Hemingway-ish in the way that, you know, he uses some pretty short sentences here and there. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like there's a little bit of Don DeLillo in there. Like I know that at least Jensen's read White Noise, but like the way that like certain characters will like interject with catchphrases or like slogans and stuff kind of reminded me of White Noise, and I thought it was funny. And also like Philip Roth, like a more modern author. It kind of reminds me of that, like really smart, witty, um, tight sentences, like really well written stuff with like kind of unexpected depth hidden under the narrative, which I'm just even more impressed the second time reading it. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, 100%. I was also just thinking how anxious this book made me. Just
Mm,
genuinely, there. Like, I don't. I mean, maybe I was anxious as. Is he? He's 14. Is that correct?
I
Is he
think in
14?
this, I think in the first section, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
sounds right.
For. Um. Well, my life was not nearly as interesting as his, but
Whatever, we were in a
just.
band.
Oh yeah. What am I saying? Um. But yeah, it was incredibly just. I just was genuinely filled with tear. I mean, and it kept the book really exciting, but just genuinely filled with a whole bunch of like anxiety because man, every adult he meets is chaotic and to some
Mm,
degree.
yeah,
And he's having to constantly deflect or figure out his way through these sort of situations. And um, I found myself just being like so tired for him. Like
yeah,
genuinely, like you're having to make a lot of very, very adult decisions at an age where you really just like want to wrestle and like dress up for Halloween. You know, and I just was like, wow,
hmm,
it's a lot of weight, man. Like you got a lot going on right now. So you weren't kidding when you said this was a coming of age book.
yeah, yeah,
In so many ways, it was very interesting to read. So
yeah. Um, so yeah, I just noted like some of those things that you mentioned, attention to detail. But and like just early on in the story, how he like characterizes these seemingly like random side characters that I think now reading it again, I'm like, what you kind of pick up on is that there's almost like maybe three narrators in this book that are all the same character, and it's Griffin in the moment where he's telling you what he's seeing as if you're back there in 1979 or whatever this first part is. And then there's like a median Griffin who is explaining it with a little bit of distance, but not all the distance that the third Griffin has, where he's clearly like an adult looking back and can interject meaning into things that he didn't understand at the time. And he doesn't always do that, but occasionally he'll pop in with this like really future tense Griffin to contextualize stuff that like you might not have been able to understand when you're 14 or whatever. And it's a really interesting narrative style that I haven't seen a ton of people do. I mean, you see, you definitely will see like the narrator narrating himself at the time of the story and then in the future, but this kind of three thing going on is really interesting, and I'm really excited to talk to Adam about that when we interview him and talk about how he came up with that and then made it seamless, because it doesn't like jolt you out of the story when he switches perspectives, and that's a really really difficult thing to do, I'm sure. But that was just something that I
really,
was picking up on at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that comes from the writing around whenever he switches those tenses. Because like the first time it happened, um, I didn't even like really think about it, and then like when the second time that he did that, I noticed that he had made that switch. But like the way that he writes, it felt almost like watching a movie in my head. And we've seen movies where like there's like a character telling the story from some future perspective, and
Hmm.
like they're able to just like change the scene. You can see the like older, more grown up main character cutting back to them as they kind of narrate something and then jump back to the story, and it felt that smooth to me, as if
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
they were just like there's a crossfade, and then whenever you know the camera comes back up, it's in the future, and he's narrating the story opposed to you watching it play out.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, like the book opens with that reminiscent perspective of, he literally opens the book, with like a lot of things that happened to me back then, it didn't seem strange at the time or whatever. And so like clearly that's him in the future looking back, but then he goes right into the 14-year-old's head and then interjects right in, sometimes in the same sentence. It'll be like, the 14-year-old is seeing his brother rifling through people's drawers, but then future Griffin kind of pulls back to contextualize that as like part of his character. Like this is something that he continued on with, into like, this kind of curiosity or whatever. And I can only imagine that was a really hard style to settle into and to make seamless like that. So that'll be definitely something to jot down for when we get Adam in here.
you
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you guys bring up a really interesting point about kind of that like future state of himself looking back, because I did feel like at the very beginning of the book, he tended to have a little bit more bravado, and he just was a little bit more sure of himself, even though he was a kid. Like, at the very beginning when he meets Naomi at the party, he's like talking about how he's playing to her feelings and just like acting and all this
He's
stuff. And like
acting. Yeah.
yeah, and you see kind of this like sense of um cunningness and just like strange confidence that he has. But then as like he kind of continues that relationship, things start to get a little bit more messy, and he feels less sure of himself. And maybe it was that perspective just looking back on him, but I just noted that like as he started to get older and maybe things got more complicated, um, his
Yeah.
character just naturally started to be like, oh, maybe I was a little bit naive and thinking I had this all figured out. There's a little bit of that came into play, and I just thought that was an interesting maybe character arc of his, at least right now, where we are in the book. So
Yeah, I misspoke earlier. I said that part one started in 1979, but it starts in 1980. He says it right there in that first opening. So I wanted to correct that before anybody in the comments accused me of not reading. um, but the book opens with this great prologue where he kind of introduces one of the central conflicts, like right off the first page. And Will kind of alluded to this already, but he opens the novel with saying, in the fall of 1980, when I was 14, a friend of my parents named Naomi Shaw fell in love with me. She was 36, a mother of two, and married to a wealthy man. Like so many things that happened to me that year, it didn't seem strange at the time. And like he's already introduced like this huge conflict right there that you're already like, wow, this is a very inappropriate thing already. Sentence one. And so you're kind of primed to be watching for this story to unfold. And as Will mentioned, in this opening chapter, the first time that he starts really talking to Naomi, the friend of his parents, he's aware that he's acting because this character is a child actor. He's in a television show that's in its fourth season, and he uses the money that he earns from that show to pay his tuition to a private middle school where he's on the wrestling team and trying to get through his academic life and set up his future and all that kind of stuff. So he already has like he already has an adult responsibility at the age of 14, which is to earn his keep so that he can go to a better school and potentially have a better future. So you already see like immediately, because of this, because of his acting career, he's already being put in inappropriate relationships with adults, and not just inappropriate necessarily in a sexual sense, but just in there's a there's a power dynamic. This isn't how we think this isn't how we think of like healthy environments for children to be placed with that kind of a burden. And the whole acting motif continues on through this entire part. You notice that there's all these characters that are always acting. Even it seems like his neighbors, that the two men, Neil and Al, that live down the hall or next door down the hall, like they have kind of this duplicitous relationship where they act very much like stable around people, but if you look under the surface, there's probably some domestic abuse going on and stuff like this that like Griffin is picking up on, and everybody is kind of acting, and Griffin is kind of taking note of all of this stuff going on around in relation to all of these kind of inappropriate positions that he's being put in with adults and stuff. And it's clear to me that like so early on in the novel that Adam has laid out some of these central themes that he's going to carry through all the way. And it's just indicative of some, not only like somebody who's lived like a very rich, full life that can now look back and notice this kind of stuff, because again, this is semi-autobiographical to Adam's own life. And we can ask him some about that when he comes on and see where those similarities start and end. But being able to look back at your life like that and realize that, there's all these connections between the relationships that you had and your acting and all of this, it just strikes me as something that like only somebody with like a full life can do, which just really interests me as like an artist myself. Is like, you always are told that like art is like a young man's game, but it's like you can't make this art when you're 22. You haven't lived enough life yet. You could guess at some of this stuff, I guess, if you really wanted to, and maybe you could even make a facsimile of these experiences that somebody might find believable. But like to really do it with this much conviction, you have to have lived a life, which I just felt like there was wisdom just kind of on every page. Sorry for the rant.
Um, I want to talk about, I guess it really makes sense for us to start at the beginning with Noemi and that relationship. So obviously she's what was it, 36-year-old
Yeah.
woman. And it starts obviously like playful, and she understands that there's like, he's just maybe being a brash, 14-year-old. And she realizes early that he's just sort of being like, just showing a little bravado, but she
Yeah.
doesn't really take it seriously. But obviously as the book moves forward, um, I think she starts to maybe desire him in some way, like realizing that he's filling that vacuum in her life. And man, I really struggled getting through this, just because in parallel, his wrestling coach's older dynamic, like, I mean, all of it's really just really like disgusting to honestly, but really just kind of these two storylines, where one is like sort of painting this more romantic light, a little bit softer, and yet it's still a really just a strange, just kind of icky power dynamic between an adult and a kid. And then you have one that is very clearly abuse.
Yeah.
They're both forms of it, but it's like it's just like it's a strange path to go through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do
For
want to
sure.
because I want to dive into both of those and start with Naomi. Because let's be honest. I don't, or maybe it's just me. So I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to be honest. Whenever I was 14, like what he did at that party, like if I had the balls, I would have tried something like that. And I definitely like, whether it would be like a movie star that was inappropriately too old for me at whenever I was 14, or like flirting with a teacher at that age. Like those are all things I think a lot of boys probably think about. And the perspective, like actually being able to, one, like be older, and two, like see that full thing actually play out, opposed to like seeing Keira Knightley whenever I was, an early teenager, and feeling something. The way that plays out is very, very different. I mean, the relationship is somewhere between treating him like her child and treating him like a love interest. And it is weird and gross, and I think really perfectly demonstrates like that this is not something that like he brought on or actually tried to make happen. Like he was in this abusive relationship where this older woman took advantage of him. And
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't. Never mind.
Well,
lost the
I just
train of
wanted
thought.
there's this specific passage that like sort of paints what you're trying to say, because I remember thinking that. I think it was like, I don't remember which chapter it was in, but it's like the way that she like touched his face, or like put her hand on his face, and then he like said, like he like curled up to her and wanted to fall asleep, and he like painted this very like maternal this paternal relationship. But then you
Hmm.
go down a couple chapters and it's clearly like romantic. And it just, that whole situation, knowing the context of like how he felt and maybe didn't feel the love at home in certain instances, and then her treating him like that and having conversations, and honestly, even anytime she bring up her kids, I was like, oh God, this is like, they're just nearly the same age. It's just like, it's
Hmm.
really icky.
This, at least for me, is the first time I've actually seen this situation play out with the young boy and the older woman.
Hmm.
That feels real and accurate. Most portrayals in media don't show it like this, and if there
No.
ever is showing how like wrong and abusive it is, it's generally the reverse. And so, like, I think it's really easy to see that for what it is, because we see it so often, and seeing this portrayal uh, with the younger person being taken advantage of, being a boy. I don't know. It's the realest example I've ever seen of how this looks.
Yeah, no, you're right that it's not like a very um it's not a very common portrayal. But I'm sure, but like this is something that is common to life. Like this happens all the time. I just saw another headline last week where something kind of similar happened. A teacher took advantage of a drunk student, or who was like a friend of her son, the same age, and he was underage, and this whole thing. And like this kind of stuff absolutely happens, but it's almost always brushed off as like not as big of a deal, because the harm or the danger is much less pronounced when there's not a physical when there's not physical danger, right? Or a physical threat. Which and I think that's why we view the opposite so much more viscerally, because of the implicit threat of violence that is like far more believable. Because in Griffin's situation, like he's a 14-year-old wrestler. He could probably beat up most normal adults, at this point. Like good wrestlers are not to be trifled with. There's no way that like and a 36-year-old mom is going to overpower him physically. Like, that threat doesn't exist. But there is a different implicit threat, which is the threat of this going away, this like intimacy, right? Which for him was much more about the almost maternal slash just kind of sounding board, somebody kind of disconnected from his family that he could kind of dump some of this stuff on that he was going through. And he even said, Griffin says himself that he would reciprocate physical things to her because he felt like it was almost like owed to her, because she had listened to him talk. Like, now he had to do his part. And like, that's still a threatening sort of power dynamic. It's just not one that it's not one that you can see. It's really just one that like has to be written about in like literary fiction. And that's why it's like, it's such an interesting portrayal, but it's also like such an important one, because this is probably exactly what it feels like, to be in this situation. And we can, this is one of the forms of media in which you could portray this particular thing in a believable way, and I just think it's just perfectly rendered.
I think it culturally, like, we can see how much this situation is trivialized, because when in the prologue, he tells his mom about what happened, and her response isn't, "Oh my God, are you okay?" It was, "But she was so ugly." And
exactly right.
It was very heavy to like watch
100%.
this unfold.
Yeah.
I think just to add one more thing to that is just, you talk about how the threat is, less obvious, in this sort of emotional sense, and the fact that he like felt like he owed it. Yeah, like, to your point, there isn't like a physical danger, but like that edge of the knife sort of emotional threat, that becomes abusive is, so I would imagine incredibly difficult to write, because you're constantly teetering on predator and prey the entire time. And yet, he walked that line so well. But that's why I felt so, just like, I know these were supposed to be tender moments, and they were for Tim in many ways, but the entire time I felt like just this dread and kind of anxiety in this situation, because I was like, oof, this is still so abusive. Like, this is like, when you step out of it, like, you can see in the intimacies of it, like, there's genuine human connection, but like, you really step out of the picture, and you're like, oh God, this is so bad. This is like so bad.
Yeah, and I think that the way that he juxtaposes the relationship between him and Naomi, and his relationship between his coach Keppelman and himself, and the way that he writes it kind of like drills down on that point a little bit harder, because I think he does something really interesting in the Naomi parts, where it almost makes you want to feel like these are tender moments, and forget about the fact that it's statutory rape in many cases, or something bordering, it hasn't quite gotten that far, but bordering into that territory. And when he writes about his inappropriate relationship with Keppelman, it's much more visceral and gross, but also completely unaware of what's happening. Like, I think that's interesting, because when he cuts in with moments of Naomi, it's like he can kind of see it for what it is from a distance. But then when he writes some of the Keppelman scenes, especially the early ones, where it's like clear molestation happening, Griffin doesn't understand what's happening, and doesn't go through great pains to describe it in a way that makes the reader completely aware. Like, we just have to guess too, because we know as much as he does, because we're too innocent to understand what's happening, right? And I think that's very interesting.
That's so, Will, whenever we were when we were doing yard work this past weekend, and I asked you about, like, have you gotten to the scene yet where Keppelman gives him the knee pads for wrestling? Um, that's the first scene where the abuse happens, and he writes it so generically that whenever I read that section, the scene ended, and then I like had to stop and be like, wait a minute, was he just raped right now? Is that what just happened?
Well, and that's what he's thinking. That must be what he's thinking. Like he doesn't know either. It's so interesting. Yeah.
Man, there's a line where he gives him the package before he opens up and sees that it's knee pads, and I think he describes Keppelman as like almost like, I don't know the exact line, but it's like it almost feels sorry for him or something. He like mentions like I almost feel sorry. He had this look on his face like he almost felt sorry for me, like about what he was about to open.
Mm.
And man, now in hindsight, like I started to like it was like a really strange reaction that it was written. So I think I was starting to like see maybe where this was going when I was reading it. But now you look back on it and it is like, oh God, like it's like it's a disgusting look. Like to know like he like maybe even Keppelman, oh obviously he knows this is wrong, but like to like almost even not even be able to hide his own disgust in himself, and yet he is so just like it's just incredibly powerful, and it just made me feel so slimy, like so
Yeah.
slimy.
And both characters, I think it's very interesting, Naomi and Keppelman, right? I think maybe even in the same chapter, they both give him a gift. And it does feel kind of like this guilt thing. He gets the knee pads from Keppelman for wrestling. He's going to wrestle this season. And Naomi gives him like several like nice neckties and instructs him to leave them in his locker and not take them home, but maybe you can wear them at school, but don't take them home. And so there's like that does kind of signal to me that there's some sort of a guilt at play where the adults aren't stupid or really even naive. Like they might be like, split dualistic kind of people, but they know what they're doing is wrong, and almost like extending a gift like that is almost a way of like alleviating yourself of guilt in a way, or trying to make something different than what it is. I had to take a note of that because I was like, oh, it's very interesting. The two people that are molesting him are giving him things. Interesting. Definitely on purpose.
Did you feel like it was implied or even obvious that Keppelman was doing this with several boys on the wrestling team? Because like
For sure.
Yeah.
because he takes Griffin down to the basement and then is a bit more explicit about what happened.
Yeah.
And then he meets up with his friends and they ask where he's been. And he goes, Keppelman. And they go, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't he even mention that like he had a calendar with all their initials on
He
the
knew
days,
exactly when
if
they
I
had a
recall?
free period. Yeah. And
Yep.
I think what like it hurt my soul after I think one or both of those scenes. They're at I think a wrestling meet or something, and Griffin talks about really caring or believing that the Keppelman cares about him and wanting to impress him and wanting him to be proud of him. And it broke my heart.
Well, yeah, it's like a total kind of Stockholm syndrome thing. And this is even after he's not only taken advantage of him in that way, but he's also like literally starving him to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like trying to making him cut weight. And I mean, it's a perfect metaphor for what's happening to him emotionally throughout this whole first part. But like, and we can revisit that. I think that the hostages chapter as we progress, and I'm going to underscore that again. But yeah, I mean, he's in a very real way, like what he's doing. This is why it's interesting that chapter is called hostages, is because what do you do to hostages? You starve them and you terrorize them. And it's like by any other name, what's being done to him by his teacher, by his wrestling coach is torture. It's by like and it's just another example of like the kind of keen eye that he has for these kind of duplicitous things in culture, where it's like, the relationship with Naomi, like what's the old joke, right? That like, when the young kid gets with the older guy, you go, oh, lucky, right? And so he's kind of he's poking at that thing, and then also poking at this other thing over here that we just kind of totally accept, which is like we have 14-year-olds starving themselves to make weight and also being molested. And like this isn't just something that he made up for the book. Like there's been multiple cases, not just of wrestling coaches, but of all kinds of coaches where this exact thing is played out in real life. And we've had, like public trials of this happening, and but like for some reason we kind of we're like, well, yeah, I mean, if the Iranians take them hostage and don't feed them, that's torture. But if your wrestling coach won't let you eat and makes you wear a rubber suit, that's just what you got to do to chase excellence. It's like kind of a funny juxtaposition, huh?
Yeah. I think a few years ago, didn't a lot of the like governing bodies for wrestling ban like weight cutting because
I
of
believe
this?
at this level, yeah.
Yeah. Because I remember I didn't wrestle in high school, but I had friends that wrestled, and I remember them talking about like wearing trash bags and like taping them closed and then standing in the shower for as long as they can without passing out to cut weight.
Yeah, Griffin kind of does this at one point,
Yeah.
with the rubber suit and the tape, and we can talk to Adam about some of the wrestling stuff. He was a state champion wrestler, and I'm sure that like that's another thing that I want to talk about was the wrestling section where he's describing the wrestling match is one of my favorite parts. Just the way in which he renders that scene is so fun and cool because I do
likes wrestling.
Well,
big surprise.
what
I said the jiu-jitsu nerd
right.
likes wrestling.
Well, yeah, and I like know what he's talking about, and I always think that's really fun when authors interject a random expertise into their book. It's like there's this section in American Pastoral by Philip Roth where he goes on this long, like almost like Melvillian tangent where one of the characters is explaining to a visitor how the glove making process in a factory works. And it goes on for pages, and you don't want to put it down because it's so interesting because you're like, you've never once thought about like how people made gloves, especially before all this automation and stuff. And he just renders it in complete visceral detail of how really good people can cut this stuff out by hand and others have, and it was like that in this book for the wrestling where it was like it was almost just like, yeah, I know a lot about wrestling, here you go, boom. And it's awesome. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember thinking either he did a like ton of research and asked a lot of people how this works, or clearly he's been like the one on the mat and was very impressed with that. So
Oh yeah, no, you can tell when people have only done research. Like I've read fight scenes and wrestling scenes in books where it's clear that somebody like put on a couple UFC matches and then like got on Wikipedia to look up terminology and then they like misuse it or it's not how people say it in the right way. And so when I was reading this, I was like, this guy wrestles. I definitely, I know for sure.
yeah.
I love that.
So
Yeah.
his
Go ahead.
dad is not as successful as Griffin is. And there's an enormous weight of responsibility put on him to be successful as an actor. And I kept waiting for, like, we find out eventually that Griffin has to pay for his own school. But I kept waiting to hear or find out that his dad had been taking money from him to like pay bills around the house or whatever. And I don't know if that ever happened, but it just felt like there was some level of expectation because he's doing what his dad does, but also some resentment because he's more successful at it. And they're struggling financially. And then here is Griffin, this child actor that's bringing in, a lot of money that his dad isn't able to earn. And then he also, like, if he's going to be like morally upstanding, he's not going to steal from his son.
Yeah, and this is underlined even more so, that his dad is clearly very talented. He's legitimately great at what he does, and in order to like make a living, he's had to excuse me, he's had to become like the guy that reads ads on the radio, which, for normal people, we would be like, oh, that's a pretty cool gig. Like, I'm sure you don't get paid all that much, but it's like kind of neat, right? And and he almost like tries to convince himself that it's really cool. Like, there's the scene in the car with Naomi's husband, and the radio turns on, and one of his commercials comes on, and he kind of like, you know stiffens up a little bit, like, oh, here's my big, but like deep down he kind of knows that like this is like a low form of what I do, and it's almost embarrassing. I mean, it's what it feels like, honestly. Like, if you're a great songwriter and you only get gigs playing shitty covers at like a bar and grill, you know what I mean? Like, it's a similar like lower form of what you do, and that is like a soul destroying, or more, it's more like a soul eroding over time sort of a situation, where it's like, I've worked so hard at this thing, I know I'm great at it, I've been told I'm great, I've performed at a high level before, I know I can, and I'm relegated to like this grunt work, like low level of what my expertise is. Like, that will castrate you long before just like normal professional failure. Like, that's almost worse in a way, because at least if you totally fail, you can pivot. But as long as you always have one foot in, because you're technically making your living, even though God, that is just so true to
Close to
life.
home,
And
buddy.
like, I can tell you about this. This is why like so much of this book hits so hard, is because not only can you tell that the author has had knows what this feels like to know you're an artist and not succeed at it for a long time. Like, you see this with multiple characters that are like becoming, or kind of always aspiring and never quite there. You see, and you will see this even more so later on in the novel. But that is just like, that is such a singular experience that I don't feel like a lot of people are able to articulate quite as well as has been, articulated in some of these characters. And I really appreciate that, as somebody that has struggled very hard, as with identity and stuff around like wanting to make your living off your art, and not.
And it,
It's a blessing
and
that I failed early and pivoted.
In a way, you can think about it like that. Yeah.
and it probably doesn't help that Griffin is literally telling his dad no more auditions
He doesn't
until
want to do it.
wrestling. So
Right.
so like he's
What's he? Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
so his son is like turning down what would be essentially his dad's dream,
Yeah.
because he wants to wrestle, and he's like, no.
Can't understand it at all. Because he's probably thinking to himself, like, I would kill for these opportunities, and
Yeah.
you just don't. You're not interested at all. Like, can you? Like, I can't imagine. Like, just imagine like y'all's kids, or like I'll throw it to Will, since he has a son. Like, imagine like your son was like 14 years old and had a little garage band and got offered like 6 record deals and was like, I want to play soccer. You would be like, what? What are you talking about? They're offering you the world on a silver platter. And it's like, it doesn't matter if it's not the world that you don't want. It's crazy. But that's kind of what's happening here.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to play soccer now, I'm a big soccer guy too, so I'll give it to him. But I totally know what you're saying. It's just like you just don't see the grab. You're like, dude, you're missing out. Like, you're gonna regret this. Kind of you're gonna regret this when you're
Like,
older type.
And you don't know
conversation
how
always
hard
heard.
it is to get here,
Yeah.
because it was just kind of given to you, which is definitely what happens here. Is like, Griffin is just handed these opportunities because he has kind of a natural inclination and he's at the right age for some of these roles. And like he kind of says that himself, is like he just fell into it. He says this to Naomi, that he just kind of fell into it. That's exactly true. And that's so infuriating to people who work really hard at a craft when someone just falls into it. Like, you know, so you're starting to already see like the rift between him and his dad kind of develop, you know?
Well, what did they say? What did that director say? I think it was like his first gig with Muhammad Ali. He's just says like he has, what was it? He's like he has the he's like authenticity, or he's like he has the something. Basically just talking
Yeah.
about he's just naturally inclined for to be an actor. Like he just has
Yeah.
the charisma or something. The riz,
Hmm.
I guess.
Yeah.
And but then you do start to see how, like, in all the instances and all the relationships in his life, I mean, not to get too literal to the book's title, but like how he figures out how to play the role to where how he knows how to navigate it. And I think that's
Yeah.
just because that's who he is as a person. He just kind of figures out the scene and then realizes what his like acting partner essentially needs to get him to what he needs to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and that's kind of that's kind of the broader contention of the novel, is that Griffin's not the only person who's engaged in this sort of playing. You know, like
yeah,
that's everyone is doing this to a certain extent, and that will become more and more pronounced as we continue reading too. It's just and I the more that I reflect on that, the more it starts to ring more true. You know.
well, the other
Um,
interesting thing about that is just like, on a stage, it's safe. It's just, it's a secure setting, right? But when you take those sort of like scene setting situations into real life, then there's, to your point, real danger and real consequences. And like
mhm.
that's what maybe is hard as a kid actor, is to separating yourself from scene in the real world, because you maybe don't know enough about the real world to know basically what's actually happening,
Well, and just to kind of piggyback off that point, like in a very real way, at the very beginning of the novel, like he kind of initially brashly kisses Naomi because he says himself that he's acting in a scene, basically. And in a scene, that's just what you do because you're on TV. That's part of the plot, right? But what that really does is it kickstarts this entire inappropriate relationship, because that's kind of the jumping off point of this whole thing, is like that initial supposed or perceived interest from him towards her kind of sets the groundwork for the whole thing, you know. So yeah, there's real people involved in real life, so you have to be careful who, again, you have to be careful who you pretend to be, just like we read in Mother Night. One thing that I did want to talk about too is just like some of his descriptions of New York, and particularly in 1980, like this time period. You know, we weren't around in the 80s quite yet. We were a bit later, but it does still kind of remind me of a world that we more or less inherited growing up in the 90s too. Was almost an extension of some of this like kind of more free range childhood stuff, which I can only imagine was even more so amplified in a city like New York, where you have access to so much, like transportation and all this kind of stuff. Like where we grew up, it was like we had freedom to like go out in the woods, but like we couldn't like get anywhere. It's not like there was a bus stop near us that could take us to like the store or anywhere. There wasn't really the option. We could get on our bikes, but you know. So I was really fascinated with that. I think that the writing around all of this is really, really good. I saw a critic or someone at one point said that in the novel, New York City kind of almost becomes a character in and of itself, the way that he writes it, which I find super interesting. As someone who's spent like a decent amount of time in New York but never lived there, is almost getting a picture into something familiar, but like a completely different paradigm to exist in a city like that. What do you guys kind of think about like this kind of some of the free range kind of adventures they go on? Like, obviously there's good and bad that comes with it, as we see in the novel. But did that strike you guys any particular way?
I mean, again, it's definitely different than our childhood, to your point. He's grabbing pizza slice and just in between after practice and just walking home, and like you said, taking public transportation and seeing all manner of just the city happen in real time around him. But again, it also, though, however, paints like he's living these pretty complicated, somewhat chaotic real human moments, but it actually doesn't feel out of place in a place like New York City, where like just so much happens all the time. And I'm not saying like only bad things happen in New York City, but what I'm saying is just like there's just it's just, what do they say, the city that never sleeps. It's the place where you're generally bound to find some sort of zany experience just by nature of human beings being compressed in a very tight sense of space. And so things are going to happen. So it actually is really the best playground for him, and like trying to figure out the world around him. It
Hmm.
really creates a kind of the perfect setting for him to both have these like really grounded moments, but then riding in the car and seeing the skyscrapers and like looking out, it just, the sense of scale to a 14-year-old boy is so much bigger in a
Hmm.
city. And in a way, I think it probably lends to his fact of like being maybe more comfortable in more adult situations, because he is just amongst so much grandiose all the time. He just everything just feels bigger. He's not sheltered or anything like that. So I don't know. It definitely. I mean, if you, the point I'm trying to make is try to take this story and put it in a different, more rural setting, and it would feel way different, like way different.
Yeah.
It would be just a very, very strange story. And just probably wouldn't have the perspective that he's probably getting living in New York City. I don't know, Jen. So what do you think?
I hate whenever people say that New York City is a character and whatever thing. I don't know. That's I feel like it's just like weird cop out. Just whenever people want to be like, "Ooh, New York, I like that city," but it does create a very interesting backdrop and like what is kind of available. It's um, definitely feels big and available, and it's interesting. Like I feel like early '80s like perceptions of New York is that it was a crime riddled shithole in some regards. But it's also, it was this massive city where millions of people lived. So it can't all be bad. Um, and so like seeing like the amount of freedom to be able to like what like walk you pass by Juilliard walking home from school, which is pretty amazing. But then also there's the scene after they leave the party that the wrestling captain throws, and the guy that they're like bullying, they put him on the train headed north into, I guess, into Harlem, and they have this conception of Harlem being dangerous and violent, and they throw him passed out and drunk on the train, and they're just like bye bye and hop off the train and watch it roll away. And I've definitely seen people get left in the field after like people dip out of a field party, but like all you got to do is
Sure.
if you can walk a mile, you can make it down to Mr. Johnson's house, and he'll call your parents.
Right. Or at the very least, it's like there nothing that bad will probably happen to you,
Yeah.
even if you sleep in the field.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. No, I really liked that scene. I just thought it was funny in a dark kind of a way too. Just the naivety of the kids, but also kind of the just I don't know, that just kind of boyish
See how far you
whatever
can
that.
take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that is so true to life. When you get a bunch of young boys together, like they are going to push everything to its absolute limit. Just trying to see what they can get away with. And I love that. And particularly too, so my, like, I think the double fantasy chapter to me is like one of the best single chapters of fiction that I've read in a really long time. I love that whole chapter. You know, it's got that in the the crank call scene, which is like my favorite in the whole book. And so they're just calling random payphones, and um, at one point, Oren, which is Griffin's younger brother, gets on there and pretends to be a kidnapped boy. Which actually, this is a real child who disappeared in 1980, and this was like kind of a um, big deal in New York, because it really in the United States, because it became kind of a national story, and it kind of started ushering, and this is why it's interesting that he includes this too, just thematically, is this is kind of almost like the Lexington and Concord, like, you know, shot heard round the world, that started and almost ushered us into the overly protective kind of helicopter parenting era, in a way, if you think about it. Like, this was like one of those first kind of big modern cases that set people, you know, on the path of where we started to kind of get in the later 90s, as we were probably, you know, right in the right age range for it, which was like, you know, don't talk to strangers and don't put your name on your backpack. And, you know, every time you turn on the news, it was always about like getting thrown in a van and getting snatched at the mall. Like, I felt like my entire childhood was characterized by um, kidnapping anxiety. Like, it was everywhere. But like, that's why it's kind of a transitional point that he's kind of showing too, that like, almost in a way, that he was the last generation that truly had that like free range experience, because, you know, nothing, the culture just hadn't quite developed into what it became. And anyway, the crank calling scenes leads to them calling this payphone, and this man picks it up and says, you know, come to this place in Central Park, and I'll tell you the meaning of life. And this is like my favorite part of the whole book. They, of course, they can't resist. They go down there, and this guy stands up on this rock and gives this full soliloquy about how, you know, at your age now is the most honest that you'll ever be in your life, because you don't think anything about the future. It's just like whatever hits you is hitting you for the first time, so you just accept it as the purest form of the thing, instead of trying to rationalize everything. And he gets like the character gets moments of clarity juxtaposed with moments of just full like insanity back and forth. And then he tells this story of him living in Hawaii, which is in another incredible segment. I want to back up in my actual book here.
So
The
there's a bit of
whole
a lesson in that story, because there's the bird flying around in the chip factory, and
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about that, because I want to get y'all's takes on that specifically, because I was wondering what you thought it might symbolize. But just to back up slightly, this character, who we'll talk about more a little bit later, this character at one point lived in Hawaii, and what he would do is um, he would dress up like a tourist, and then he would go to resorts and like eat off people's plates that had like left their table and stuff. And he would go down. There's, you know, great writing in here about like he would go down the hallways to like the room service carts and like grab pastries and parts of food and eat off of it, and nobody ever questioned him, because he looked like he belonged there, which again, another person acting like they belong somewhere, like acting the part, right? This is a consistent theme. And his job is he works at a potato chip factory, and at one point a bird gets in, and the men in the factory start throwing potatoes at it, trying to hit it, and the bird's trying to escape through an open window or a broken window. And just before he's about to escape, he gets hit by a potato, and then somebody comes and steps on it and kills it, and then parades its poor bird corpse to the cheers and adulation of the factory workers. And it kind of ends, that section kind of ends with like everyone confused, like, what is this guy talking about? And then Oren says that he knows what he means, but he never explains what he means. But I was just curious, like, Griffin reflects on this a little bit later, but what do you think, if anything, like, what is this character trying to portray? Is there, I mean, I don't know. There's almost like, to me, like, it just struck me as like almost similar to like the underground man in Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky, where he says that, even if man only had to sit around and eat cakes and busy himself with the continuation of the species, he would still play some nasty trick, basically just to have done something, because like you have like there's like this innate need to just like rock the boat or to tip the apple cart or whatever. And it struck me in a way kind of like that, where it was like these men that were kind of like imprisoned in this crappy job, like couldn't bear to see something fly freely out, and so they had to like stop it. And in a way like that, I don't know, maybe it could be that, like, is that saying something more about life, that we hate to see people escape from where the situations that we're stuck in? Like, I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think there's this juxtaposition because the guy telling the story, he seems to be, if I'm remembering correctly, he seems to be relatively appalled by these men chucking potatoes at this bird, and then he picks up a potato and throws it out a window and smashes it so that the bird has a area of escape, and he starts imagining that feeling of like being in like this shitty situation and how good it would feel for that bird to cross through that threshold of the window and feel the open air and feel that immense joy. And if the bird would even recognize that it is now free from this dangerous situation.
Right. Like, does it have enough awareness to even know about danger? And that could kind of symbolize Griffin too, that like he is unaware of the danger that he's actually in. He thinks he has an approximation of the immediate danger, but like this is creating something, more danger than he's aware of, perhaps too. Yeah, that's good.
It's also interesting too that like in a way I feel like throughout this book, and maybe we'll learn more about just like Oren's activities.
For sure. Yeah.
He's like sort of acting. He's always like the wise one, or like he just like always sort of like the fact that he like understood, what he said he understood the whole situation, and he's always sort of this like back. I don't know. I got the sense he was just like this little guy who thought he was just like so wise and just could see the world in all these different ways, and yet he's not the one with all these like insane life experiences. Who should probably have, like Griffin, who should probably have a little bit more awareness about what's going on, like generally should probably see the symbolism in this story and relate. At the same time, like I when I was reading that chapter, I was thinking about just the fact that like the way it ends where the kids are like, what? To me, I read it as like kids just hearing some adult go on and on and on about the purpose of life, and they have no sense of they have no existential crises. They're just like kids. And I just imagine us like in some of the situations when we were playing, in a band, and we'd go and we'd meet someone who was clearly out of their mind, and then we all just would be like, what
did you guys figure out who he is? No. I'll give you a hint. Because phonies think they know, the man continued, but phonies don't know what they don't know.
Ian McKay.
Anything? Who says phonies? Where's the famous, what famous book talks about phonies? I'll put it that way.
I feel like I'm in class again.
Yeah, no, sorry. I have to do this to you because it's so much fun.
This pop quiz.
The Warriors.
All right. The Catcher in the Rye.
Oh.
The Catcher in the Rye. Who is famously inspired by The Catcher in the Rye?
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Close. He has 3 names. What's the name of the chapter? Double fantasy. What is double fantasy? It's
I
a
don't
John
know,
Lennon
dude.
album. It's a John Lennon album. It's Mark David. It's Mark David Chapman.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're hanging out with Mark David Chapman and they don't know.
Who then goes on to kill.
It's a pretty subtle hint, like the phonies thing. Like you would have to know Catcher in the Rye and know that it was
Wait a minute.
supposedly influenced him to kill John Lennon.
Doesn't
But
the book spell that out later? Whenever like the assassination
it
happens?
hints again, yeah, because Griffin says, I've seen that guy before. He looks familiar.
Well, that, and then there's a mention about the killer loving Catcher in the Rye, and so it's almost like
Yeah,
Adam is.
he hints it a little bit. He hints at it a little bit more at the end of the part. I love that reference, and so now I want to I was already reading this chapter knowing that, so I was thinking back to the part about the bird and wondering like, what does that say about how Mark David Chapman might have felt about John Lennon, and because he shoots him, like what does that connect? Maybe that's something that we can talk to Adam about. I know that there's something else at play there other than it just being a really good scene. So I'm gonna take a note of that and ask him.
Yeah, that was cool. I didn't put that together, but good catch.
Yeah, I'd say John Lennon is probably my least favorite Beatle. So
Defensible position, I suppose.
yeah. Oh, what if I said my favorite Beatle was Ringo?
Well, you are a drummer. That would be believable.
He's not really my favorite Beatle.
Well,
it's fun to say.
should we wrap this one with how we end at the end of part 1?
Yeah, let's kind of, we can talk about how it all kind of culminates after this double fantasy part. Christmas break happens in the middle of the school year, and he's still supposed to be weight cutting for his weight class that he's supposed to be fighting in. And over Christmas break, he's with the family at the holidays, and he kind of defiantly like eats a bunch as kind of an act of defiance, and he gains like 8 pounds or something and throws him way off or I think 12 pounds or something. He throws him way off of where he's supposed to be. And his wrestling coach is like infuriated with him and kind of puts him on like a starvation diet. And as we kind of alluded to earlier, like puts him in a very similar torturous situation of abuse. And that kind of carries us into towards the end. He has another wrestling match that he intentionally throws because he just doesn't care anymore, basically. And maybe it's, he's doing it for the wrong reasons or whatever. And as the part kind of continues, Naomi, who, as we've been talking about this whole time, is technically abusing him, does have like a maternal instinct towards him and notices that he's gaunt and obviously dehydrated. She, picks at his hand and his skin kind of stays up, and, which is a sign of dehydration, he says. And she tattletales, basically. She calls his mom and says something's not right, basically, with the wrestling. Something's going on. And his mom marches into the school, and it's implied that she gets Keppelman fired, but he also just kind of changes hands into another school district, or not school district, but just another school, because rather than have the scandal of what was really going on, he just goes to a new institution, and there's going to be a new wrestling coach. And that's kind of where this part ends. Was there anything you guys wanted to talk about specifically? I really like the flashlight tag scene. I thought was really good in the 12 Days of Christmas section. We could talk about that, or just talk about the end of the wrestling season.
I think there's something that I don't know if it preempts Naomi's decision to call Griffin's mom, or if this would have happened regardless. But there's also the scene where they get caught alone together with the cops by the cops because they park in front of a fire hydrant and they're literally about to get in the back seat. And I remember reading that scene and it felt like it was building up to like this is whenever like explicit sexual contact was going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And then a cop shows up and she is alone in a car on a dark alley with a boy. And so he thinks quick on his feet and says to the officer, "Hey, is my mom going to get arrested?" And that puts the officer at ease. And then he writes her ticket and off. And you can I feel like that creates this big shift really within both of them because it makes them kind of face what's actually happening. He knows that he has to make up this lie about being her kid to keep from it getting out that he's in this abusive relationship, and he loses that emotional intimacy. Also, like she's like freaking out because now, like if she gets taken in, or even with a ticket, she knows that this house of cards is about to crumble because her husband is going to be asking questions like, "Why were you parked on this side alley down the road whenever our daughters are
with a teenager?"
Yeah. So like, what the hell's going on? So I wonder if that pushes her to like be more decisive instead of just saying like, "Oh, you need to eat and drink water." She calls his mom. But also like that obviously preempts her deciding that like that the last time that he sees her, she says that this is over. We're not going to do this anymore. But I don't know. I'm just curious how connected you think some of those things are.
Yeah, no, I think you're pretty much right. I think that him kind of inadvertently switching the dynamic there at the end does make them face like the stark reality of like, oh yeah, you could be my kid. And that's going to be super plausible and believable to this police officer. And there's something deeply wrong with that. And perhaps that too does allow her to become a little bit more maternal in that moment. And now Griffin does tell us too, future Griffin tells us that like he thought that was going to be the end of it, but it's not, obviously. Yeah. And that's kind of part of the cliffhanger for part two. But yeah, no, I think that's probably exactly how that may have played out.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably like it because she seems to at least think that she actually cares about him and is not just an abuser. But I wonder if she would have taken
and two things. Yeah, both things can be true.
Yeah. And that's what what I was thinking about is if she would have, if they hadn't been confronted with the situation and that delusion shattered, if she would have taken the risk to call his mom. Because like she's even by calling his mom, she is taking the risk because she, how much does she say? And is Griffin gonna spill his guts?
Right. That's right always there. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, always part of the risk. Yeah. Which kind of in a weird twisted way kind of makes that a pretty selfless act, which kind of further complicates this very twisted relationship, because if mom starts asking too many questions and he starts telling the truth, it's over. It's very, very, very bad. Her entire life could fall apart, because she's a character who's she only really can she's like a stay-at-home mom. Her husband's rich and she could lose her entire lifestyle, access to her children, the whole thing. It could be just absolutely devastating if she were caught. So yeah, I think that it's interesting that Adam will write characters who are involved in really despicable things as also having humanizing elements. He does this with Keppelman. He does this with a bunch of characters. Like they have human moments. They're not caricatures of just like monsters that like, which is I think one reason why the book feels so realistic is that you're not like you know the feeling when you're reading a character, or like probably more commonly when you're like watching TV or whatever, and like a character is like so comically overwritten as the villain that like the things that they say aren't even believable because they're so cliche and so over the top, and like the whole, they have like, or you can even feel it when the writer has total contempt for a character. Like, I've read this in books before where like they write like some, a parental character who they based off one of their parents who they just absolutely hate. And so everything that comes out of their mouth is just despicable and crappy. And there's no redeeming quality really about this person. It doesn't read as believable. It reads as like a personal vendetta that's being disguised as a character in a book, right? And this is the complete opposite, like where you feel very conflicted, just like the character would have, because you're just like, this person isn't even evil. They're just wrong, like, and that's actually how people are too, most of the time. Like there are people who are just like absolute dregs of society, but like most people just do bad things and also contain like human elements, and like, that's what makes all of this kind of stuff so complicated and believable, I think. But anyways.
For sure. Well, part 2 is up next. We might meet in 2 weeks. It may be 6 months, but we will get to part 2 eventually, guys.
Yeah, it'll happen hopefully sooner rather than later. Part 3 of this series will be, like we've already mentioned, we will be sitting down with the author Adam Ross to ask him all of our burning questions. And hey, if you leave some questions in the comments of the next couple videos on YouTube, we'll, if they're good questions and are not derogatory or attacking him or calling us names or whatever, we will direct them at Adam, and you could have your questions answered. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe and talk to us in the comments. Put some of your questions about the book in there, and we'll be sure to ask Adam Ross when we sit down with him. Good to see you guys. Talk soon.
See you too. See you, boys.